So let's just go ahead and go straight to it. The story is about deformities, the increasing number of deformities amongst newborn babies in specifically Fallujah and some of the other cities around Iraq. First of all, your assessment of it.
The issue of the use of depleted uranium is older than the issue of the white phosphorus, because the U.S. did use depleted uranium in the 1991 war and during the Iraqi sanctions. So I did meet with many doctors, for example, in Basra, in the south of Iraq, and they said that they have been tracking the number of birth deformities and cancer cases coming from one part of Basra called Abu al-Khasib. Depleted uranium was used very heavily there by the U.S. in 1991. And in that area, the number of cancer cases raised from 2 cases a month to 2 cases a day. So around 30 times more within the 12 years that these doctors were following it. There was a professor in Baghdad University called Dr. Suad Al-Azzawi, who did very detailed research on the depleted uranium effect on Iraqis in the 90s. Now the problem is that the use of the white phosphorus in Fallujah has not been studied deeply yet. It was just exposed by an Italian documentary a couple of years ago. And I think there is a need for an independent study and investigation into the effect of this other weapon on Iraqi birth deformities.
Okay, let's just, as a point of clarification, when you refer to 1991, you're specifically talking about the first Gulf War.
Yes.
And now you're kind of seeing a similar pattern happening after what's happened recently between American forces and Iran.
That's correct. The U.S. did use DU bullets and DU missiles, depleted uranium, in 1991 and in 2003 very heavily. I actually did go multiple times with journalists and researchers after 2003 to sites that were bombed by U.S. missiles that are made of depleted uranium, or bullets that are made of depleted uranium that were shot against Iraqi tanks. And I went with the Geiger counter to see the radiation effects. And the radiation in some of these areas were 2,000 times higher than the regular background radiation. And if these were tanks in neighborhoods, they had children playing in them, people were just living around them. Some of the depleted uranium bullets went down in the ground, they were shot in the ground and contaminated the surface water. So the effects are, huge, they are scary. And I don't think we had a proper study to see the exact effect of the DU and white phosphorus and other weapons that were used by the U.S. I think many of these things would constitute war crimes because of their effects on the local populations, the civilian populations that lived around these areas.
Okay, let's talk about that just a little bit. I've read that cases where birth defects are now being reported 2 times a day, whereas before 2003 they were reported maybe 2 times, maybe every 2 weeks or so. And then also, more specifically about the use of white phosphorus, there's some debate about whether or not white phosphorus specifically should be listed as a chemical weapon. Can you elaborate on that just a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have a lack of information in this area. We have two areas that we don't have enough information on. The first one is what weapons have been used by the U.S., because we don't know all the different types of weapons that were used in the U.S. By the U.S. forces in Iraq. We know DU and white phosphorus because of the media coverage. So there is a need for research to see what other weapons are used by the U.S. And the other side is to see the effects of these weapons. For example, in Baghdad, in April of 2003, the U.S. bombed the area around the Baghdad airport, where I used to live, with very strange type of weapons. One of my friends actually had a survey around the area and found that most of the neighbors around the Baghdad neighborhood had respiratory diseases that other people did not have. So we are talking about even wider range of weapons that were used that did affect civilian populations. And there's a lack of independent study groups in Iraq that would conduct a study to show us the effects of the U.S. weapons that were used.
Gotcha. Well, Kevin, it sounds like there's at this point no definitive correlation between the birth defects and the use of white phosphorus and depleted uranium, but certainly a pattern that has emerged. So I guess we're just going to go ahead keep keeping tabs on it. But in the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and send it back to you in the studios.
Well, you know, when the director of the